Nita Kalaga, Lugal Sheshab Kima, Lugal Kiengi Kuruke. So the first line is simply Inanna. At the start of the second and third line, we have the same sign, which is a new sign, which is Nin, meaning lady or mistress. You may notice the Lugal sign at the start of the last two lines that I've underlined in blue. There's also three identical signs that I've underlined in yellow. These signs are the key sign. Key is a sign that is used whenever a geographical location is mentioned. Medical documents were also written in clay. This is a medical prescription, a copy of one of the earliest lists of ingredients for remedies. The Sumerians, physicians who composed this tablet, appears to have favourite minerals, which include salt, river bitumen, and potassium nitrate. From the natural world, he utilised milk, snakeskin, and turtle shell. The majority of medicines come from the botanical world, including thyme, plum tree, pears, figs, and willow. An example of one of the prescriptions for an ailing organ is to sift and knead together all in one turtle shell, the sprouting naga plant, and mustard. Wash the sick spot with quality beer and hot water. Scrub the sick spot with all of the needed mixture. After scrubbing, rub with vegetable oil and cover with pulverized fur. This tablet was the work of what the Sumerians called an azu. An azu relied on observations to find cures for ailments. They are the closest thing that the Sumerians had to a physician or a doctor. The other type of practitioner was the ashipu. They sought the cause of the illness in the spiritual world and applied magical remedies. These two sources of medical treatment didn't always work independently of one another. There are instances when an azu worked with an ashipu to cure a patient. This is a replica of a Sumerian school tablet. Scribes needed to start somewhere, and school was the starting point. The scribal school curriculum was divided into two phases of education, basic and advanced. A scribal apprentice would begin his training at a very young age in early childhood between the ages of 5 and 7. Only the wealthy or elite families had the means to send their children to school. There is evidence of young girls being educated as scribes, but the majority of students were young boys. On the tablet, the top half was thought to be written by the teacher, with the student having to copy the signs onto the lower half of the tablet. The majority of these school tablets discovered have all been of a round shape. One possible reason for this is because it was easier for the student to form a round tablet, and they didn't need to be encased in a clay envelope. What's a clay envelope? Well, clay envelopes covered letters to ensure no one could read the inside. When a scribe wrote a letter, they would cover it in its own envelope and seal the envelope with a cylinder seal. Cylinder seals were made of hematite, obsidian, steatite, amethyst, and lapis lazuli. Private letters give us a huge amount of information. An example of this is the huge library of letters uncovered at the site of Mari in eastern Syria on the border with Iraq. The king of Mari was a man named Zimri Lim. He lived during the Old Babylonian period, when letters were written in the new dominant language of Mesopotamia, Acadian. Zimri Lim lived in a truly magnificent palace, a model of which you can see up here. There are so many human stories that can be found in the hundreds of letters found at Mari. Here's an interesting one sent by Zimri Lim's daughter, Erishti Aya, to her mother. "Speak to the lady, my mother. Thus says Erishti Aya, your daughter. May my divine lord and lady grant you long life for my sake. Why didn't you ever wear my dress, but sent it back to me, and made me dishonoured and accursed? I am your daughter, and you are the wife of a king. Your husband and you put me in a cloister, but the soldiers who were taken captive pay me more respect than you. You should pay me respect, and then my divine lord and lady will honour you with the good opinion of the city and its inhabitants. I am sending you a nanny. Do send me something to make me happy, and then I will be happy. Don't neglect me. The letters from Mari were written in Akkadian. Akkadian is Semitic like Arabic. Sumerian is something completely different. Beltum Shah Shamu in Akkadian is 3 words, Lady of Heaven. In Sumerian, the word order is different, with lady appearing first, Nin, heaven second, An, and appearing last, Ak, for of. These signs come together to form Ninanak, which led to the names of the goddess Inanna. Because Sumerian is not related to any other language in the region, some scholars have suggested the Sumerians moved into the region from elsewhere. Arguably, the earliest city in the world, Eridu, lay on the banks of the river Euphrates, and due to its southerly location, some have argued the Sumerians came from the sea. When Akkadian adopted the writing system of the Sumerians, they also took a large number of their signs and kept their meaning. The sign for king was kept, for example, meaning Lugal, if read by a Sumerian, and Sharum, if read by an Akkadian. At the time of the Old Babylonian period, in the 18th century BCE, Sumerian was seen as a scholarly language. For royal inscriptions, kings started to use the old direction of writing to show them to be as influential as their Sumerian predecessors. Sumerian itself is not fully understood, and we can only guess how some of the words were pronounced. It is difficult to detect regional differences in Sumerian. Akkadian, on the other hand, evolved into 2 main dialects, and when I use the term dialects, I do use it very loosely: Assyrian and Babylonian. Both of these dialects evolved at the same time, and the regions in which they were used largely corresponded to the regions that the Assyrian cities and Babylon had influence over. Neo-Assyrian is the cleanest and the simplest of cuneiform scripts to read, that starting Akkadian students begin with text written in it. If you've ever seen one of the winged bulls from the Khorsabad or Nineveh, these are covered in the Neo-Assyrian script. Of all the scribes who wrote in Neo-Assyrian, none of them is as well known as Ashurbanipal, the last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Ashurbanipal was proud of his scribal education. He wrote, I, Ashurbanipal, within the palace took care of the wisdom of Nebo, the whole of the inscribed tablets. Of all the clay tablets, the whole of their mysteries and difficulties I solved. He was one of a few kings who could read both Akkadian and Sumerian, and even claimed he had read texts from before the Great Flood. During his reign, he collected cuneiform texts from all over Mesopotamia, especially Babylonia, and placed them in his royal library at Nineveh. He commissioned copies of literary works from libraries around the kingdom in order to obtain the hidden treasures of the scribes' knowledge. The collection he made at Nineveh has become known as the Library of Ashurbanipal. He was known for being cruel to his enemies and was able to use threat to gain materials from Babylonia and other surrounding areas. What was his motivation? He was known to have an interest in collecting divination texts, and one scholar has suggested that his original motive may have been to gain possession of rituals and incantations that were vital to maintaining his royal power. Perhaps the greatest of finds from the library are the literary works: the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Babylonian story of creation, the Enuma Elish, the myth of Adapa, and the story of the poor man of Nippur. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells a story of a heroic and strong king and his pursuit of eternal happiness. In the story, Gilgamesh meets with a man of the wild who runs with the animals beyond the city walls. Gilgamesh eventually earns the respect of his opponent, befriends him, and the two become inseparable. This man is Enkidu, and the story has been interpreted as an analogy of how the Sumerians at first wrestled with the Akkadians who moved into their lands, but then came to accept them as equals. Some Old Babylonian versions agree with this, but Sumerian sources have Enkidu tamed, not as a companion to Gilgamesh, but as a slave instead. There is also evidence of Sumerians attempting to keep out a group of Semitic pastoral nomads that moved into the north of Mesopotamia after the Akkadians had taken root. The new group of invaders were the Amorites, and the marriage of Martu, which is the story you heard earlier, is an example of how the Amorites were accepted into Mesopotamian society, because Martu is the name of the Amorites, and it's also the name of the Amorite god. The Amorites flocked to the region in large numbers as the Sumerians were busy dealing with another group of invaders. The Elamites were the invaders who had come in to the east of the country. The defeat of the Sumerians at Ur at the hand of the Elamites led to the lamentation over the destruction of Ur, a text made up of 11 songs that deals with how the gods had abandoned the city of Ur and Sumer, and how the marauding Elamites destroyed the city. Woe is me, Enlil handed over the city to the storm. He handed it over to the storm that destroys cities. He handed it over to the storm that destroys temples. The Amorites managed to assimilate themselves with the Sumerians and Acadians so well that 200 years later there were a number of powerful kings that had Amorite names. The most famous of these was Hammurabi. Hammurabi is most famous for his law code. However, it is not technically a code of laws, as not every eventuality is covered. It is instead a list of very specific events and corresponding punishments. The laws are listed on a large stone stele made of basalt. In order to make himself as important and worthy of kingship, Hammurabi had the writing on the stele take the same direction as the ancient Sumerian cuneiform, and is read from top to bottom rather than from left to right. At the top of the large stone is Hammurabi presenting himself to the Akkadian god of the sun and justice, Shamash, whom the Sumerians called Utu. Hammurabi has his hand placed towards his mouth as a sign of greeting and respect. Shamash has the rays of the sun coming from his shoulders, showing he is the god of the sun. A lot of Hammurabi's laws start with the two words Shuma Awilam, which translates as if a man. The first of his laws is straightforward but extremely harsh. If a man accused another man and brought a charge of murder against him but has not proved it, his accuser shall be put to death. The laws go on, covering theft, slaves, land disputes, loans, marriage, assaults, to name a few. For a lot of them, the punishment seems to fit the crime, and if it doesn't, then circumstances can dictate the punishment. For example, if a fire broke out in a man's house and a man who went to extinguish it casts his eyes on the possessions of the owner and takes the possessions of the owner of the house, that man shall be thrown into that fire. Perhaps the most well-known of the lists of laws of Hammurabi are laws 196 and 200. If a man has destroyed the eye of a son of a man, they shall destroy his eye. If a man has knocked out a tooth of a man his equal, they shall knock out his tooth. In other words, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which is also found in the Hebrew Bible. So far, I have mentioned the cuneiform documents found in Iraq and the larger Mesopotamian region. But other tablets have been found as far away as Amarna in Egypt. The Amarna tablets are proof that Akkadian cuneiform wasn't just the language and script used in Mesopotamia, but was the language used across the whole region. Akkadian was the language of diplomacy. The Amarna letters are an archive mainly made up of communication between Egyptian administration and representatives in Canaan and Amaru during the New Kingdom. Amarna is the modern name for the Egyptian capital of the Akhenaten founded by Pharaoh Akhenaten during the 8th dynasty. There were 382 tablets found there. Cuneiform has also been found in Iran, but in this case it is Persian cuneiform. Interestingly, Persian cuneiform is made up of just 46 signs. The Elamites had earlier started to use cuneiform system, but the Persians were very late to the game. Their system is unrelated to Akkadian and Sumerian, and according to one scholar, it was deliberately created in the 6th century BCE. The Hittites in Turkey also started to use cuneiform, although at a much earlier time than the Persians. They took the old Assyrian script and adapted it for their own language. This was significantly awkward and difficult, as Hittite is not a Semitic language, but an Indo-European one. Cuneiform also has a role to play in the invention of the first alphabet. Ugaritic is an abjad, like most Semitic scripts, where each sign represents a consonant, and it is down to the reader to provide the vowels. Although it is a Semitic language and it has grammatical features similar to Akkadian, the signs are completely different and are independent from other signs used for different languages. The decipherment of Ugaritic has been called the greatest literary discovery from antiquity since the deciphering of Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian cuneiform. Cuneiform has provided historians with a wealth of knowledge in many different fields of study. Thanks to the Sumerians and the Acadians who continued their tradition, we have a superb understanding of the beginnings of civilization. The Fertile Crescent gave rise to city-states that kept excellent administrative records. The Epic of Gilgamesh gives us insight into social acceptance at the time. But what is the lasting legacy of the Sumerians? Well, they had a number system based around the number 60, where 60 was used as a single sign to represent that number. And that is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. Cuneiform varies greatly in its different forms. Akkadian has over 400 signs, each sign evolving over thousands of years and having up to 16 different interpretations. Ugaritic, on the other hand, has just 30 signs. One thing they all share is they give us an insight into the past that tells us more than the archaeological record. That concludes the talk. I hope you have found it to be both informative and useful. On behalf of Badiaa, June and myself, I would like to thank the Iraqi Business Council for their amazing hospitality. Thank you.
أعزائنا الضيوف، نختتم حفلنا اليوم بجزيل الشكر والامتنان لسعادة سفيرة جمهورية العراق السيدة صفية السهيل وجميع المشاركين في هذه الأمسية الثقافية، وأخص بالشكر فريق زيبانغ الحكواتي، بديع عبيد، جون، سايمون كليمسون، الذين تحملوا عناء السفر من المملكة المتحدة للتعريف والقدوم إلى الأردن للتعريف بحضارة بلاد وادي الرافدين. هذه الحضارة المبهرة، بالفعل إنها مبهرة. لا يفوتني أن أشكر أيضا إدارة فندق الرويال عمان لاستضافتهم أمسية هذا اليوم، كما أشكر السادة الإعلاميين وإذاعة طلال أبو غزالة لتغطيتهم هذا الحدث. آملين لقاءكم في نشاطاتنا المقبلة. شكرا جزيلا ودمتم بألف خير.